My name is Daniel, and the moment I finally held the deed to my house in my own hands should have been the happiest day of my life. 5 relentless years working 2 jobs, skipping vacations, saying no to dinners out, driving a car so old it rattled with every turn had all led to this single victory. I had beaten the system, shaved 25 years off a 30-year mortgage, and walked into full ownership of a home I thought would always be a dream. I thought freedom was finally mine. But freedom doesn't always look like celebration. Sometimes it looks like betrayal. Because instead of popping champagne, I was standing in the crosshairs of a family war I never saw coming. The hook came swiftly at a Sunday dinner that should have been ordinary. My brother's wife put down her fork, fixed me with a smile that was far too deliberate, and announced in front of everyone, "This house is family property now. We'll be moving in with the kids." I wish I could tell you I laughed, or that the room erupted with disbelief. But what I saw instead were nods, silent, complicit nods, from people who were supposed to have my back. My brother Greg's grin of relief, my parents' approving looks, and her tone of absolute certainty. It was as if the decision had already been made without me. And in that moment, a truth hit me harder than any financial struggle I'd ever faced. I had spent 5 years building a fortress of independence, only to have my own family try to storm its gates. That's when I realized this story wasn't just about money. It wasn't just about a house. It was about control boundaries and the audacity of people who believe your sacrifices belong to them. Before we go further, let me ask you something. Have you ever had a moment where the people you trusted most suddenly treated your hard-earned success like it was theirs to claim? If you have, you'll understand why I couldn't stay silent. And if you haven't let me tell you this when it happens, it cuts deeper than any stranger's betrayal ever could. I'll take you back to how it all began, because if you don't know the ground I fought to stand on, you can't understand why I refused to surrender it. This wasn't just about a set of house keys. It was about every sleepless night, every dollar squeezed from a paycheck, every moment I chose discipline over comfort. And yet, within one shocking declaration at a dinner table, all of it was being erased. I didn't know it then, but this battle was only beginning. The invasion wouldn't come with soldiers at the gate, but with family in moving trucks. And I promise you, by the end of this story, you'll see exactly how far people will go when entitlement collides with your freedom. If you're still with me, then you probably know how heavy a moment like that feels. Sitting at that dinner table, hearing my own family treat my sacrifice like it was theirs to take it, was surreal. I had dreamed for years of the day I would be debt-free, of sitting on my porch with a glass of iced tea watching the sun set over land that was finally fully mine. But instead of joy, I was being told my hard work was just the starting line for everyone else's expectations. And here's where I pause, not just for myself, but for you. Because stories like this, they aren't rare. Before I take you deeper into what unfolded, let me ask you something. Where are you watching this from? Drop it in the comments. And if you've ever faced pressure from family over what you worked for, hit that subscribe button. These stories aren't just entertainment, they're warnings. Now back to that table. Vanessa, my brother's wife, wasn't smiling because she thought she was joking. No, she had the calm conviction of someone who had already rehearsed the speech in her mind. She wasn't asking, she was declaring. She wanted the house, the bedrooms, the backyard swing set she described as if it already existed. And Greg, my brother, the man who used to borrow my toys as a kid, just nodded as if this arrangement was inevitable. The silence that followed was worse than any shouting match. My parents nodded too. My mother's eyes filled with that manipulative sadness she wielded like a weapon. "Family helps family," she whispered, as though guilt could rewrite the deed with her words. I remember setting down my fork. My hand trembling, not from fear but from rage, I tried to swallow. It wasn't just the words that stung, it was the entitlement. The assumption that because I was single, because I had no kids, my sacrifices were negotiable. As if my freedom was less valuable because I lived alone. And in that moment, something shifted inside me. I realized this fight was never going to be about fairness or gratitude. It was going to be about boundaries. Either I drew the line or they would bulldoze over it until I was just another casualty of their poor decisions. I wanted to scream, to slam my fists on the table, to shout the truth that no one had sat beside me during those 5 years of grueling overtime. No one had brewed coffee at 2 a.m. while I pored over spreadsheets. No one had lived in a bare apartment so every spare dollar could go toward the mortgage. But shouting wouldn't change what they had already decided. Instead, I sat in silence, observing, memorizing every detail, the smug tilt of Vanessa's chin, the way Greg avoided eye contact, the complicit nods of my parents. They thought I would fold, that the quiet, responsible sibling would once again carry the burden. But this time they were wrong. You see, battles like this aren't won in one moment. They're wars of attrition, a series of small choices stacked until one day you look back and realize you either surrendered everything or you stood your ground. That night, I didn't announce my rebellion. I let them think they had the upper hand. Because sometimes the strongest move isn't immediate resistance, it's patience. It's knowing your enemy has just revealed their plan, and you're smart enough to prepare for the counterattack. And let me tell you, the counterattack was coming. They didn't know it yet, but they had awakened a part of me I hadn't even known was there. This wasn't going to be a story about losing my home. It was going to be a story about discovering how far I was willing to go to defend it. By the time dessert was cleared from the table, Vanessa was already planning paint colors for my kitchen. But in my mind, I was already planning the battle lines. Because if family was going to treat my independence like a communal prize, then I was going to show them what it meant to fight for your freedom, even if it meant standing alone. I grew up in a world where money was never just money. It was the air we breathed, the storm cloud above our heads, the thing that decided whether dinner was peaceful or tense. My childhood home was a modest 2-bedroom in a suburb outside Cleveland. The walls were thin, the lawn patchy, and the kitchen table was where my mother fought her daily battles with unpaid bills. When I was 12, my parents' marriage cracked open like an egg. The divorce itself wasn't dramatic, no screaming, no broken plates, but the aftermath was. My mother got the house and the mortgage. My father moved into a 1-bedroom apartment across town and paid just enough child support to check the legal box, but never enough to ease the weight that crushed my mom's shoulders. I remember nights waking up for water, tiptoeing into the kitchen, and finding her hunched over a calculator. She'd press the buttons like they were lifelines, tears streaking down her cheeks, whispering numbers to herself like prayers. The pile of bills never got smaller. The house was never quite warm enough in the winter, never quite lit enough in the evenings. I learned quickly, money isn't comfort, it's survival. That reality etched itself into me. While my friends could afford to dream about cars at 16, about college parties, about spring break trips, I was busy making silent promises. Promises that when it was my turn, when I was grown, I wouldn't live in fear of eviction notices or overdraft fees. I wouldn't be the parent crying at a kitchen table wondering how to stretch a dollar. So when high school ended and college began, I carried that vow like a shield. Northern Illinois University wasn't glamorous, but it was affordable. And affordable was the only word that mattered. While other students joined fraternities and flocked to campus bars, I worked 3 jobs: cashier at the bookstore, waiter at a diner, data entry clerk on weekends. People laughed at me. My roommates called me crazy. They joked about how I never had time for beer pong or road trips. But every paycheck, every tip, every typed spreadsheet cell was another brick in the wall I was building between myself and the financial chaos of my childhood. I graduated with my degree not free of debt, but carrying a fraction of what most of my classmates shouldered. I saw them drowning in loans before they even walked across the stage. I was already dog-paddling toward freedom. That's the foundation of who I am. That's why 5 years ago, when I signed a mortgage, I didn't just buy a house, I declared war on everything that had haunted my childhood. I wasn't just paying for walls and a roof. I was paying for peace, for dignity, for the right to sleep without listening for my mother's quiet sobs. And maybe that's why the betrayal from my family cut so deep. They hadn't seen what I'd seen. They didn't carry those memories. For them, my house was just a convenient solution, a bigger space, a new playground for their kids. For me, it was everything I had bled for, everything I had promised my younger self. So when Vanessa said, "It's family property now," it wasn't just audacious, it was sacrilege. She wasn't just trying to take over a building. She was trying to rewrite the very meaning of survival of the vow I had made in those dim kitchen lights when I was 12. And here's the part you need to hear. Our past writes our future battles. If you've ever wondered why someone fights so hard for something others dismiss, look closer. Somewhere behind that fight is a child who lived without, who swore never to let it happen again. That was me. That still is me. And it's why when the invasion of my home began, I already knew I couldn't back down. Losing my house would have meant betraying the boy who once watched his mother cry at a table of bills. And that's a promise I was never going to break. College wasn't a season of wild freedom for me. It was survival dressed up as opportunity. While most students I knew decorated dorm rooms with fairy lights and posters of rock bands, I decorated mine with sticky notes full of reminders, work shifts, tutoring schedules, deadlines. My life became a cycle of constant motion. Monday through Friday mornings, I was behind the counter at the campus bookstore, stocking shelves, ringing up nervous freshmen with armfuls of overpriced textbooks. Evenings, I traded the smell of paper and ink for the clatter of dishes at the local diner, balancing trays that weighed almost as much as I did, smiling at customers, even when my feet screamed with pain. Weekends. They belonged to a dimly lit office where I typed row after row of numbers into endless spreadsheets for a small business that barely knew my name. It was exhausting, yes, but every hour was a brick in the fortress I was building against debt. When I watched my classmates head out for Friday night parties, I told myself the truth. No one else seemed to understand the beer would be gone by morning, but the loan statements would last decades. I wasn't about to drown before I even got started. By the time graduation came, my friends had the photos laughing in caps and gowns, their arms slung around each other. I had the numbers. My student loan balance was half of what theirs were. For me, that was the real victory walk across the stage. After school, I landed an entry-level job at a financial firm in Chicago. Nothing glamorous, long hours, endless reports, but something about the work clicked with me. Risk management, that's what they called it. I had lived it my entire life. I knew what it meant to weigh survival against chance, to gamble on rent money or groceries, to stretch $1 into $3. While others saw lines of data, I saw stories, cautionary tales written in numbers. My bosses noticed. Promotions came not quickly, but steadily. By the time I turned 30, I was a senior analyst, the kind of title my younger self wouldn't even have dreamed was possible. And yet success didn't change me the way some people thought it should. I kept living in a cramped apartment with thin walls. I kept driving my ancient car, the one that coughed in the winter and rattled in the summer. My coworkers bought designer suits and shiny watches. I wore the same rotation of clearance rack shirts. Friends teased me, saying I lived like a monk. But I knew what they didn't. Every choice, every penny saved was another step toward freedom. Then came the turning point. 5 years ago, I walked into a house 20 miles outside the city. It wasn't spectacular, 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, a small yard. But when I stepped into the living room, something shifted. I saw sunlight spilling across the carpet. I saw a corner perfect for a reading chair. I saw the life I had promised myself. The asking price was $300,000. I had scraped together a 20% down payment, more than most could dream of at my age. The bank approved the mortgage. 60 days later, the keys were mine. That first night, sitting on the bare floor, I cried, not out of weakness, but out of release. The boy who had once stood in a dark kitchen watching his mother cry had bought a home of his own. But here's the twist most people never consider. I didn't just want to own a home. I wanted to own it outright. 30 years of payments. That sounded like another prison sentence. I was determined to pay it off in 5. So I doubled down. I brewed my own coffee instead of buying it. I canceled subscriptions I barely used. I shopped at discount grocery stores, patched old clothes, and poured every spare cent into that mortgage. Even the tax refunds, even the birthday checks from my grandmother. And I started a side hustle, online financial consulting, teaching others how to budget, while funneling every dollar into the principal. People thought I was insane. Maybe I was. But discipline became my weapon, sacrifice my armor. And step by step, dollar by dollar, I marched toward the impossible. The day I signed the papers, the realtor smiled politely. The banker shook my hand, and I walked out with a folder of documents that proved I was now a homeowner. But the real ceremony didn't happen in an office. It happened the first evening I stood in that house alone. No furniture, no curtains, just echoes bouncing off freshly painted walls. I dropped my keys on the counter, slid down to the hardwood floor, and let the tears come. Not sad tears, release. I had spent years preparing for this. And here I was, inside a 3-bedroom ranch-style home, with a backyard that hummed with cicadas in the summer and would sparkle under snow in the winter. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't some downtown penthouse, but it was mine. Still, even as I ran my hands along the doorframes, reality whispered in my ear, $240,000 still chained me. A 30-year mortgage payment stretching into a future where I'd be middle-aged before freedom ever arrived. That thought curdled the joy. I hadn't fought this hard just to end up back in another form of prison. So I made a decision that most people would call reckless. I would pay off the entire mortgage in 5 years. I remember staring at the spreadsheet I created that night, the numbers stark and unrelenting. To do it, I would need to make double, sometimes triple payments every single month. Bonuses, tax refunds, freelance income, everything would go to the principal. The plan left almost nothing for leisure. It meant years of saying no when friends invited me to weekend trips, skipping new clothes until my shirts frayed at the collar, brewing coffee at home instead of ever stepping foot into Starbucks. I tightened every bolt of my life. Streaming services canceled, dining out only on rare occasions, vacations forgotten. I clipped coupons, shopped at discount grocers, and when I wanted to celebrate, I let myself buy a $2 frozen pizza instead of ordering takeout. But the biggest shift came when I launched a side hustle. Nights and weekends, I logged into my laptop and became an online financial consultant. People hired me to help them budget, to create plans that could dig them out of credit card debt or help them save for their own homes. It was ironic I was giving advice I was barely surviving myself, but every dollar earned went straight to the mortgage. My social life withered. Friends stopped asking if I wanted to go out because they already knew the answer. Dating was almost impossible. What woman wants to hear? Sorry, I can't afford dinner out because I need to make an extra mortgage payment this month. But I didn't mind. The vision of a life unshackled by debt was brighter than any fleeting pleasure. For 5 years, I lived and breathed that goal. I updated my spreadsheet weekly, watching the numbers fall like a countdown. I plastered sticky notes with the shrinking balance on my bathroom mirror. Every time I brushed my teeth, I reminded myself, keep going. And then last month it happened. I clicked submit on my final payment, and the balance read 0. Just like that, the house was mine in full. Not in theory, not in 30 years. Now. I celebrated alone, but it was glorious. Take out a bottle of wine I had been saving, and the warm glow of a sunset over my backyard. I leaned back in my chair, listening to the cicadas, and whispered aloud, I did it. But here's what I didn't know, that victory wasn't the end of my struggle. It was the beginning of a new one. Because while I saw freedom, my family saw opportunity. And where I saw the walls of my sanctuary, they saw open doors waiting to be claimed. And that's when the battle for my home, the one I thought was over, truly began. When I tell people I paid off my mortgage in 5 years, they expect fireworks. They expect hugs, champagne corks, flying family members lifting me onto their shoulders like I just scored the winning touchdown at the Super Bowl. What I got instead was silence, the heavy, awkward kind that sours every word spoken after. I remember the first Sunday dinner at my parents' house after making that final payment. I couldn't hold it in. The pride had been building in my chest all week, and I thought, this is the moment, this is when they'll finally see all those years of sacrifice weren't in vain. So between bites of pot roast, I said it. I made the last mortgage payment. The house is mine. I waited. My mom's fork hovered midair. My dad's jaw tightened. My sister's eyes flicked away. Then came the words that carved deeper than any insult. Well, must be nice, my dad muttered. No congratulations. No, we're proud of you. Just suspicion, like my success was a crime I had committed against them. It hit me then, to them my victory wasn't a victory. It was a threat. That night, lying in bed, I replayed every scene of the past 5 years. The long shifts, the canceled outings, the loneliness, the constant calculations. I had built this fortress of stability to protect myself, but instead of celebrating my family, stared at it like scavengers circling fresh prey. Within weeks, the comments started. My sister, drowning in credit card debt, called me late one night. Since you're all set with your house, maybe you could help me pay off a few bills, just until I catch up. My mom slipped in hints about how the family deserved to share in the blessing. My dad, who once told me I'd never make it without handouts, suggested I sell the house and split the money with them so everyone could have a fair shot. At first, I laughed it off. Surely they didn't mean it. Surely they saw how insane it sounded. But the laughter died when the requests became demands. The air at family gatherings grew colder. Words sharpened like knives. You've forgotten where you came from, my mom hissed one evening. Money's changed you. No, money hadn't changed me. Sacrifice had. Discipline had. The endless grind of double shifts and empty nights had. What had changed them was envy. I tried to reason with them, to explain that I wasn't hoarding wealth, I was protecting the only stability I had ever known. But reason doesn't matter when jealousy is at the wheel. To them, my house wasn't my home. It was a pie on the windowsill, and they wanted a slice. I began to notice the way they looked at me like I owed them something. Like every square foot of that house was somehow built with their blood instead of my sweat. And for the first time in my life, I felt afraid not of losing the house, but of losing the family I had fought so hard to stay loyal to. The day I unlocked my front door and found my sister sitting on the porch, suitcase at her feet, declaring, "I'm moving in. You've got plenty of space," I knew the storm had arrived. Freedom, I realized, comes at a cost, and mine was about to be tested in ways I had never imagined. The night my sister showed up with that suitcase, it felt like the ground shifted beneath me. There she was standing on my porch like she had every right to be there, her eyes sharp with determination. She didn't knock, gently, didn't smile sheepishly. She announced it like a decree. "I'm moving in. You've got plenty of space." I froze, keys dangling in my hand. My house, the home I bled for, suddenly felt invaded before she even crossed the threshold. I tried to laugh it off. "This isn't a hotel, Sarah." But her face didn't flinch. She rolled her suitcase right past me into the hallway like she had been planning it for weeks. Inside, she spoke faster, her voice rising. "You're selfish if you don't let me stay. Family helps family. You've got 3 bedrooms sitting empty while I'm drowning in rent and credit card bills." The words selfish hit like a slap. I wanted to scream back that I had spent 5 years living like a monk, sacrificing everything, friends, dates, vacations, so I could own this home. I wanted to remind her of the nights she posted photos sipping cocktails while I sat hunched over spreadsheets scraping together extra payments. But instead I just whispered, "This is my home. I worked for it. You can't just move in." That's when she lost it. She stormed into the kitchen, waving her arms, shouting loud enough that neighbors probably heard. "You think you're better than us now, living in this house like some king while the rest of us struggle? Mom was right, you've changed." The mention of Mom lit the fuse. This wasn't just about her needing a place to stay. This was coordinated. I could see it now, every bitter remark at Sunday dinners, every snide comment from Dad about fairness. They weren't just jealous. They were preparing to stake a claim. I took her suitcase and shoved it back toward the door. My hands trembled, but my voice was steady. "No, you don't get to barge in and take what I built. Not you, not anyone." Her eyes filled with tears, not of sadness, but of rage. She spat the words like venom. "You're not family anymore. You're just a greedy stranger." Then she stormed out, the wheels of her suitcase clattering against the concrete. I thought that would be the end of it. But a week later, my phone lit up with messages from Mom and Dad, echoing the same accusations. "How could you treat your sister that way? A real man helps his family. If you don't open that house to her, don't bother coming around anymore." The guilt dug into me. I lay awake at night, wondering if I had made a mistake. Was I heartless? Was I betraying them? But then I'd walk into my empty living room, see the walls I had painted with my own hands, feel the floor I had scrubbed until it gleamed, and remember this wasn't luck. This was sacrifice. Still, the divide was growing, and then came the knock that changed everything, a legal notice taped to my front door. My family wasn't just angry anymore. They were preparing for war. What started as one suitcase on my porch had become a battle for my very right to keep the life I built. The morning I found that paper taped to my front door, the world tilted. A plain white envelope slapped against the wood like a warning sign. At first I thought it was junk mail, maybe a neighborhood notice. But when I peeled it off and saw the letterhead County Court, my stomach sank. Inside was a summons. My own family, my parents, my sister were suing me. Their claim that the house I bought, the house I paid for with my blood and years of sacrifice, should be considered family property. They argued I had an unfair advantage, that I owed them a share because I benefited from family support. It was surreal. Family support. These were the same people who mocked me for working double shifts, who told me I'd never make it. Now they wanted a legal claim to the walls I had built with my own hands. I sat on the couch, letter trembling in my grip, memories flooding back, skipping dinners to save $20, rejecting vacations to save hundreds, sleeping with the thermostat turned low to shave off a few bucks from the utility bill. None of them were there for that. None of them lived through those nights. And yet here they were, dragging me to court to take it away. The first hearing was chaos. I walked into the courtroom, my chest pounding, and there they were, Mom, Dad, and Sarah sitting together like a united front, not even glancing at me. My own blood lined up against me like strangers. Their lawyer spun a story about how my success was built on the foundation of family, that I owed them gratitude in the form of ownership, that I was greedy for refusing to share. When it was my turn, I stood and told the truth. I spoke about the sacrifices, the sleepless nights, the relentless work. I described the loneliness, the rejections, the fear of failure that haunted me every day. And as I spoke, I scanned their faces for some flicker of recognition, some sign they understood. But all I saw was stone. The judge postponed the ruling, asking for documents, bank statements, proof of payments, work records. As I left, Sarah leaned close enough to whisper in my ear, her words dripping with poison, "You'll lose. One way or another, you'll lose." Those weeks became a nightmare. I spent nights buried in paperwork, reliving every payment, every receipt. Meanwhile, my phone buzzed with messages from extended relatives, uncles, cousins siding with them. "Why not just let her live there? You should share. Blood is thicker than water." But was it? I'd never felt more alone. Walking into that empty house after each hearing felt like entering a fortress under siege. The walls that once comforted me now pressed in with the weight of the battle. And yet something shifted inside me. For the first time, I realized this wasn't just about the house. It was about ownership of my life. For years, I had bent under their expectations, their manipulations. Paying off the mortgage was my first act of defiance. Keeping the house would be the ultimate declaration I belonged to myself. The trial wasn't over. The war had only begun. But as I looked around those four walls, I whispered a promise into the silence. "You are mine, and I won't let them take you." The real fight was coming, the verdict, the fallout, and the truth that would cut deeper than any legal document ever could. I thought the lawsuit was the endgame, that the battle would be fought with lawyers and paperwork until one side finally gave in. But life has a way of unearthing truths you never asked to hear, truths buried so deep they split your world open the moment they surface. It began with a manila folder I dug out while preparing evidence for court. Old tax documents, loan statements, scraps of paper I hadn't touched in years. Buried inside was a single letter yellowed at the edges, stamped with the bank's logo. It wasn't mine, it was in my father's name. I almost tossed it aside, but something about the date made me pause. It was from the very year I started saving for the house. The letter showed an application for a mortgage, denied. The reason: poor credit, high debt, insufficient income. My father had tried to buy a house back then, but he couldn't. Suddenly the puzzle snapped together. Their resentment wasn't just about me having a house. It was about me achieving the dream he had chased and failed to catch. The lawsuit wasn't just greed. It was humiliation dressed up as family duty. At the next hearing, their lawyer pounded the table, claiming my stability came from decades of family support. I asked the judge permission to submit the letter. When I handed it over, my father's face drained of color. The courtroom fell silent as the judge read. For the first time, the truth hovered in the open air. This wasn't about fairness. It was about envy. That night, my phone exploded with calls. Relatives, furious, demanded to know why I'd humiliated my father in public. I didn't answer. I sat alone in the kitchen, staring at the dim light overhead, thinking about how a single piece of paper had exposed years of buried shame. But here's the thing. Exposing the truth didn't end the fight. It escalated it. My sister stormed into my driveway days later, pounding on my door, screaming loud enough for the neighbors to peek out their blinds. "You ruined him," she shouted. "He can't show his face anymore, and it's your fault. You always have to win, don't you?" I stood frozen, watching her rage boil over. She wasn't just defending Dad, she was defending the narrative that held our family together, the story where I was the selfish one, the outcast. Without it, they had nothing. And yet part of me ached. I hadn't meant to ruin anyone. I had only wanted to defend what was mine. But in doing so, I'd cracked something fragile inside them. Maybe something that had been waiting to break all along. I realized then the lawsuit wasn't just about my house. It was about rewriting family history, about turning my victory into their redemption, their excuse. And when that failed, they had only one weapon left: destruction. The court date for the verdict was set. But I knew deep down that whatever the judge decided, the battle at home was already lost. The family I once knew was gone, swallowed by envy, shame, and betrayal. Still, the story wasn't over. Because on the eve of the verdict, another revelation landed at my doorstep, a truth darker than any lawsuit. Something that would twist the knife and change how I saw my family forever. The secret wasn't about money or houses or envy. It was about blood itself. The night before the final verdict, I thought I had seen the worst my family could throw at me. But fate has a cruel way of reminding you that the deepest cuts don't come from strangers or even lawsuits, they come from blood itself. It started with a knock, not the violent pounding of my sister's rage, but a hesitant, uneven rhythm. When I opened the door, an older woman stood there holding a small box in her trembling hands. She introduced herself as Margaret, a neighbor who had lived next to my parents for decades. Her eyes darted around as if afraid someone was watching. "I don't want to get involved," she whispered, "but you deserve to know." She pressed the box into my hands and left without another word. Inside was a collection of old photographs, brittle documents, and one envelope sealed with my mother's handwriting. I almost didn't open it, but something in me knew it was the key to the storm that had swallowed us. The letter was addressed to my father, dated the year I was born. The words were shaky, emotional, filled with guilt. In it, my mother confessed something unthinkable. I wasn't his biological child. I read it again and again, the words blurring under my tears. She had been with another man. Just once she wrote a mistake she claimed she regretted forever. She had begged my father to raise me as his own, promising to keep the secret buried. Suddenly, the lawsuit, the resentment, the cruelty, it all made sense. To my father, I was a living reminder of betrayal. Every time I succeeded, every time I proved I could stand on my own, it was salt, in an old wound he had never healed. My house wasn't just a symbol of independence, it was proof that I had become more than he ever could, despite not being his. The next morning, standing in court, I couldn't look at him the same way. When the judge ruled in my favor, confirming the house was mine alone, my family erupted. My sister shouted. My mother wept silently. My father sat stone-faced. But for me, the verdict was hollow. Because winning the house didn't erase the truth that now haunted me, I had never really belonged. That night, I walked through the rooms of my home, touching the walls, the furniture, the quiet spaces. They felt both mine and alien, like I was drifting between two worlds, one where I had fought for ownership and one where I had lost my foundation. For days I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. The questions gnawed at me. Who was my real father? Did he even know I existed? Did my family's cruelty stem from hatred or from pain too great to bear? But here's what hit me hardest. Even though the truth had shattered the ground beneath me, I realized I wasn't broken. Because the house still stood. My life still stood. And while my bloodline was tangled in lies, the choices I made were still my own. The lawsuit ended, but a new chapter began: the search for identity, for healing, for a way to reclaim the meaning of family when the one I was born into had collapsed under secrets. And I knew this much: I could no longer cling to the hope that my parents would ever accept me. The only path forward was building a new foundation, one that wasn't tied to shame or envy. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more. That the man in the shadows of my past, the one my mother never spoke of again, would someday surface. And when he did, everything I thought I knew about myself could change again. The storm had passed, but the horizon promised another reckoning. When the verdict came down and the gavel struck, I thought the chapter had closed. The house was legally mine. The lawsuit was over. But families don't dissolve neatly with a judge's ruling. They unravel like rope, frayed by years of hidden tension, slow at first, then all at once. A week after the trial, I received a message from my sister. "We're coming over. Be ready." No explanation, no apology, just a threat dressed as a warning. My chest tightened. For days I had replayed the revelation of my birth, my father's silence, my mother's tears. Now the storm was heading straight for my door. That evening, headlights flared in my driveway. My father stepped out first, his figure rigid against the fading sun. My sister followed, her fists clenched, her face twisted in rage. My mother stayed in the car, staring out the window like she wished she could vanish. They didn't bother knocking. My sister shoved the door open with her shoulder, storming into my living room. "You destroyed this family," she spat, her voice shaking with fury. "You humiliated Dad, exposed secrets that should have stayed buried. And for what? A pile of bricks and wood?" My father stood behind her, silent, his eyes locked on mine. Not with anger this time, but with something colder: detachment. I felt my throat tighten, but I forced the words out. "I didn't destroy this family. You did when you sued me, when you lied, when you turned envy into war. And you," I looked straight at my father, "you hated me long before any of this. because I reminded you of the one truth you could never face." His jaw tightened. For a moment I thought he might strike me, but instead he spoke, his voice low, broken. "You were never mine." The words cut deeper than any lawsuit, deeper than any betrayal, because they weren't just fact, they were rejection. Final, absolute. My sister stepped forward, her finger jabbing at my chest. "You think you're better than us. You think this house makes you superior. But you'll end up alone. You have no family. None." I let her words hang in the air, let the silence stretch until it swallowed us whole. Then I said the only truth I had left. "Maybe I don't. But I'd rather stand alone in honesty than be chained to a family built on lies." That broke something in her. She lunged forward, screaming, but my father caught her arm, holding her back. For the first time, his eyes softened, not with love, but with exhaustion. He turned to leave. My sister fought against his grip, but he dragged her out the door. My mother never moved from the car. When the engine roared to life and their headlights disappeared into the night, I sank onto the couch, my hands shaking. The house felt cavernous, echoing with the ghosts of words I could never take back. That was the night my family officially ceased to exist. No phone calls, no visits, no more attempts at reconciliation. Just silence, sharp, final, absolute. And yet, as I sat there in the quiet, a strange peace settled over me. For years I had clung to the illusion that family was unbreakable, that blood bound us no matter what. But the truth was simpler, harsher. Family is choice. And they had chosen envy, resentment, and lies over me. I hadn't lost them that night. I had been set free. Still, I couldn't shake one lingering thought: if blood had betrayed me. Maybe the answer lay in finding the other half of my story. The man whose shadow stretched across my life. The man my mother never named. The confrontation had ended one war, but it had opened another. I used to think the hardest part of my story was fighting for a house. But the night my father rejected me as his own, the foundation of my life cracked deeper than any lawsuit could have carved. I wasn't just someone without a family anymore. I was someone without an origin. For days, I walked around my home in a fog. The walls, once symbols of victory, now felt like unanswered questions. Who was I really? If I wasn't my father's child, then half of me belonged to a stranger. And that stranger was out there somewhere. I started with the box Margaret, the neighbor, had given me. I spread the photographs across my dining table like pieces of a puzzle. Some were familiar family gatherings, birthdays, snapshots of a life I thought I understood. But tucked between them was a single photo I had never seen: a man in his 20s, leaning against a car, smiling at the camera. His eyes, sharp and haunting, looked disturbingly like mine. On the back of the photo in faded ink was a name: Daniel. No last name, no date, just that. I felt a rush of adrenaline. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't drowning in loss, I was propelled by a purpose. But searching for Daniel wasn't simple. My mother had burned the bridge to him decades ago. There were no records in the house, no letters, no phone numbers. All I had was a single photograph and a first name. So I started asking questions. Margaret told me she remembered a tall man with a motorcycle visiting the neighborhood around the time my mother got pregnant. She couldn't recall much else, but she gave me another clue. He wasn't from here. He left town quick, like he was running from something. That clue lodged itself in my mind. If Daniel had been running, what had he been running from? And more importantly, had he ever known about me? Each night, I sat by the glow of my laptop, combing through public records, old news clippings, social media archives. There were hundreds of Daniels, too many. But with each dead end, I grew more determined. And yet a darker fear grew alongside my hope. What if he didn't want to be found? What if he rejected me just like my father had? Could I survive that twice? Still, I pressed on, because silence had already stolen too much from me. One evening, as I stared at the photo again, something shifted inside me. This search wasn't just about bloodlines. It was about reclaiming the narrative my family had tried to bury. About proving that I wasn't a mistake born of betrayal, but a person worthy of truth. And maybe, just maybe, of belonging? But here's where I'll pause for a moment, because I need you, the listener, to step into my shoes. What would you do if you found out your life was built on a lie? Would you chase the truth even if it meant tearing open wounds that never fully heal? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear your voice, because maybe your story holds the courage I'll need for mine. Because as much as this story has been about betrayal and loss, it's also about choice. And I had chosen to search. The road ahead wasn't clear, but it was mine. For the first time in months, I wasn't being dragged by lawsuits, guilt, or rejection. I was walking forward by choice toward the man in the photograph, toward the truth that might break me or set me free. And as I closed my eyes that night, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: hope. Fragile, trembling, but alive. What I didn't know was that the closer I came to Daniel, the more dangerous the truth would become. Because some secrets aren't buried by accident, they're buried to protect you from what lies beneath. The deeper I dug, the more I realized this search wasn't just about finding a man. It was about walking into the heart of a mystery my mother had spent her life burying. Every record I pulled, every faded piece of gossip I unearthed, pointed to the same conclusion: Daniel hadn't just disappeared. He had been erased. One breakthrough came late one night. After hours of searching, I stumbled on an old newspaper article from the early 80s. The headline screamed, "Local mechanic linked to fatal accident flees town." My breath caught as I scanned the photo beneath it. It was him. The same sharp eyes, the same crooked smile as the man in my faded photograph. According to the article, Daniel had been involved in a car crash that killed a wealthy businessman's son. Witnesses swore he wasn't at fault. The other driver had been drunk, reckless, but Daniel didn't stay to fight. He ran. And from that day on, he vanished from every record as if the earth had swallowed him whole. I leaned back in my chair, my heart racing. This wasn't just about a man who left town. This was about survival, about a life lived in shadows. But a darker thought clawed at me. Had my mother known? Was that why she chose to stay silent all these years? Not because she wanted to protect me from shame, but because she wanted to protect me from danger. The puzzle pieces didn't stop there. A few days later, I drove to the town courthouse to sift through archived legal files. The clerk, an older man with tired eyes, squinted at the name I'd scrawled on the request form. Daniel. Yeah, I remember him. Caused quite the stir back then. But if you're digging into him, be careful. The family of the boy who died, they weren't the forgiving kind. My stomach twisted. Suddenly, the silence made sense. Daniel wasn't just hiding from the law, he was hiding from people powerful enough to destroy anyone connected to him. Driving home, I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. I had set out to find the truth. But what if the truth came with consequences far bigger than me? What if digging into Daniel's past dragged me into the same storm that swallowed him decades ago? That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window staring at the empty road outside, wondering if I was already being watched. Paranoia sank into my bones. Every noise in the house, every flicker of headlights felt like a warning. But fear couldn't outweigh curiosity. Because no matter how dangerous the truth seemed, one question burned brighter than all the rest: did he ever know about me? The thought haunted me. If Daniel had run to save himself, did he leave me behind knowingly, or had my mother kept me hidden from him too? I had to know, so I decided to take a risk. Using the scraps of information I had, I tracked down a forum for classic car enthusiasts in the Midwest. It was a long shot, but one user kept mentioning a mysterious Danny who drifted from town to town fixing cars for cash, never staying long. His posts hinted at places, small towns, back roads, a trail of whispers that almost felt like breadcrumbs left just for me. I sent the user a message, my hands trembling as I typed, "Do you know where Danny is now?" Hours later, a reply pinged back. "Last I heard, he's in Arizona. But if you're looking for him, you better have a good reason. He doesn't take kindly to strangers asking questions." I stared at the screen, my pulse pounding. Arizona. It wasn't certainty, but it was a direction, a place to start. Still, before I packed my bags, I couldn't shake the lingering dread. This wasn't just a reunion waiting to happen, it was a confrontation with everything my family had hidden, everything they had sacrificed to keep buried. And something in my gut whispered that when I finally stood face to face with Daniel, I wouldn't just be meeting a man. I'd be opening a door that once shut could never be closed again. But I couldn't turn back now. Not when I was this close. The truth was waiting, and with it a twist that would shatter everything I thought I knew about why he disappeared. The desert air hit me like a wall the moment I stepped off the bus in Arizona. It was dry, scorching, and relentless, yet I felt alive, buzzing with anticipation. Every mile I'd traveled to get here carried the weight of decades of unanswered questions. Somewhere in this vast, sun-baked land was the man whose absence had shaped every corner of my life. I rented a cheap motel room near the edge of town, the kind where the neon sign flickered half the night and the air conditioner groaned louder than it cooled. I wasn't here for comfort. I was here to follow the trail of whispers I'd pieced together from dusty archives and obscure online forums. The mechanic who never stayed long. The drifter named Danny. The ghost of my childhood imagination. My first stop was a diner recommended by the forum user. The waitress, a woman with hair dyed fire red and a voice gravelly from too many cigarettes, looked at me strangely when I mentioned his name. Danny, she repeated, tapping her pen on the counter. Tall guy, worked on cars out back a few months ago. Never talked much. Paid cash. One morning he just left. Left. Always leaving. My chest tightened. But then she leaned closer, lowering her voice. If you're looking for him, try the scrapyard off Highway 19. Folks say he goes there when he's in town. I thanked her, left a tip bigger than the coffee was worth, and drove out into the desert night. The scrapyard loomed ahead, a graveyard of twisted metal and rusting dreams. My headlights cut across rows of broken cars, their shattered windows reflecting like dead eyes. And then I saw him. He was older now, of course, gray streaks in his hairlines carved deep into his weather-worn face. But there was no mistaking him. The man from the photo. The man I'd spent my entire life wondering about. He was bent over in engine grease on his hands, as if the decades hadn't changed a thing. My knees almost buckled. This was it. The moment I'd imagined since childhood, the reunion I'd begged the universe for. Daniel? My voice cracked, barely louder than the cicadas buzzing in the night. He froze. Slowly he turned, his eyes narrowing as they fell on me. For a heartbeat I saw confusion, then suspicion, and then something deeper, recognition. You shouldn't be here, he rasped. My breath caught. I had rehearsed so many speeches, so many ways to reveal myself. But all I could manage was, I'm your daughter. The wrench slipped from his hand, clattering to the ground. His face drained of color, but he didn't look surprised. He looked haunted. I knew this day would come, he whispered. But you don't understand. They'll come after you now. I stepped closer, anger and longing warring inside me. All I want is the truth. Why did you leave? Why did you disappear? He shook his head, glancing nervously around the yard. Because it wasn't safe. Not for me, not for you. That accident, it wasn't an accident. The family of the boy who died. They wanted blood. And they had money, power, everything to bury me alive. If I stayed, I wouldn't have survived. If I claimed you, they would have destroyed you too. His words hit like a storm, but my heart screamed with another question. Did you ever try to find me? Did you even care? His eyes shimmered with tears he didn't shed. Every day. But I couldn't. Loving you meant putting a target on your back. So I let you grow up without me. And that's the burden I've carried every single mile I've run. The silence that followed was unbearable. I wanted to scream at him, to throw every year of abandonment in his face. And yet seeing him standing there trembling, broken by guilt and fear, all I felt was the crushing weight of what had been stolen from both of us. But before I could speak, headlights swept across the scrapyard. A black SUV rolled in its engine, growling like a predator. Daniel's face went pale. They found me, he muttered. And now they've found you too. My blood ran cold. The roar of the SUV's engine echoed in the scrapyard, bouncing off the towers of rusting steel. My pulse pounded in my ears as the headlights blinded us, washing the desert night in harsh white light. Daniel's hand gripped my arm. His voice was hoarse, urgent. You have to leave now. But I stood frozen, staring at the men stepping out of the vehicle. They were dressed too neatly for a scrapyard, black suits and the desert heat sunglasses reflecting the pale moon. One of them carried a baseball bat, the other a crowbar. They didn't need guns to make their message clear. The taller man sneered as he spotted Daniel. Well, well, looks like the ghost crawled out of hiding. His eyes flicked to me, narrowing. And who's this, a new liability? Daniel stepped forward, shielding me with his body. She's nobody. Leave her out of this. But I'd had enough of being invisible. My voice shook, but it carried across the yard. I'm his daughter. The words sliced through the night like a blade. The men laughed, cruel and hollow. Perfect. One more piece to break. Daniel turned to me, desperation in his eyes. Run, please. But I didn't run. I couldn't. For years, I'd lived in the shadow of absence, drowning in unanswered questions. I refused to end this night by running away again. The men advanced, circling us like wolves. My heart hammered, but my mind sharpened. I spotted an old steel pipe leaning against a pile of scrap. My hand closed around it before fear could stop me. "This ends tonight," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. The fight that followed was chaos, metal, clanging shouts splitting the desert air. Daniel, despite his age, fought with a ferocity that came from years of running, of surviving. I swung the pipe with everything I had, adrenaline turning fear into fire. At one point, one of the men lunged at me, grabbing my arm. Instinct took over. I jabbed the pipe into his ribs, the clang reverberating through my bones. He dropped, gasping. For the first time in my life, I felt power, not the kind that comes from wealth or status, but the raw power of standing my ground. Finally, with headlights from another approaching car cutting through the night, the men retreated, cursing their SUV, roaring back onto the highway. Dust swirled in their wake, leaving only silence and the sound of my ragged breathing. I collapsed against a rusted fender, the pipe slipping from my hands. Daniel sank beside me, his chest heaving. For a long time we didn't speak. The fight was over, but the weight of everything unsaid pressed heavier than the desert sky. At last I whispered, "You should have told me. I deserved to know." His eyes glistened with tears he didn't hide this time. "You're right. I failed you. But you stood by me tonight when you had every reason to walk away. That's more forgiveness than I ever deserved." I looked at him, this broken man who had once been a myth, then a ghost, now flesh and blood. I didn't know if I could ever call him Dad, but I knew one thing: I would never again let someone else decide my worth, my safety, or my freedom. The next morning, as the sun rose over the desert, I packed my bag. Daniel watched, silent. I placed a hand on his shoulder. "I don't know what our future looks like, but I know mine won't be built on silence anymore." Driving away, I felt lighter, not because the story was neatly tied up, but because I had faced it. I had looked the truth in the eye and survived. And if you're hearing this, maybe that's the lesson I want to leave you with. Freedom isn't just something you inherit. It's something you fight for every day in small choices and big battles. Family can lift you or wound you, but in the end, the power to claim your life is yours. So if you've ever carried a silence too heavy to bear, let this be your sign: break it. Speak your truth. Claim your ground. And if you're still here listening, don't just vanish when the story ends. Stay subscribed, join this community. Because sometimes the only way to carry these battles is together. And who knows, the next story might be the one that sets you free. When the dust finally settled, I found myself walking into a quieter life, one where silence no longer felt like exile, but like choice. The echoes of that scrapyard night stayed with me, but they weren't chains anymore. They were reminders. Proof that I could stand my ground, that I could fight for my own freedom and walk away stronger. I started to notice the little things again, the way morning light slipped through the blinds, how coffee tasted better when I wasn't gulping it down on my way to escape someone else's expectations. I planted small flowers outside my porch, a symbol of growth, delicate yet persistent, just like the parts of me I once thought were too broken to bloom. Daniel and I kept in touch carefully, like two people rebuilding from rubble. Our calls were short, at first tentative, sometimes awkward, but they were something. And in those halting conversations, I realized forgiveness wasn't about excusing the past. It was about deciding the past no longer had the right to control me. Life didn't transform overnight. There were still bills, still long hours, still memories that stung when I least expected it. But there was also peace, the kind I created myself. And that mattered more than anything else. If you've stayed with me until this moment, maybe you understand. The real battle is not against the people who wronged us, but against the belief that we are powerless. Once you break that lie, you open doors to a life that is fully yours. So as this story closes, don't let it just fade into the background noise. Carry it, reflect on it. And if you're searching for the next spark, the next story that might just mirror your own, stay with us. Sometimes the right story arrives exactly when you're ready to hear it.